Mr. Jones, we're live. How you
Thank you.
doing?
Great to see you, man.
Great to see you too. It's been a while. Vinyl generation.
Yes.
That's the anomaly or the amazing thing about a person like yourself.
Well, I don't know if it's an anomaly, but that's a sort of mantra that I've always lived by. I've always felt like I was part of the vinyl generation and still am. That's still how
Sure.
I prefer to consume music and listen to music and introduce music.
Well, absolutely. If I think about it, a person like yourself, to connect the dots, and I'm looking at the global community and vinyl and the films that you made, but to go from Pittsburgh, where I've been, and you grew up there, to be based in Prague, where there's a great pressing plant, to have spent so much time in making films in Africa, around electronic, other music, around punk, having made a seminal film like Punk in Africa,
Thank you.
and to be honored to be working with you for 13, nearly 13 years or so, while we've been pushing a passion project connected to the Beach Boys.
Yeah, for
What
sure.
else can I say?
No, I mean it's been a great pleasure for me too. I don't see the work that I've done on all these different continents as being that far removed from the other places. It's all connected. It's all part of a similar and global story. And I think the stuff that we've been doing with the Flames and around that project that's all related. That's related to Punk in Africa. It's related to Vinyl Generation. It's related to the stuff I do in Washington D.C. now. It's related to DJ Spoko and his legacy, which is still going. All of that. So I think all of those things, all of the work that I do on my films is it's obviously connected to music, but I think it's really connected to the medium of vinyl on a deeper level. That all of those things share that philosophical connection to vinyl as a different listening experience, as a ritual, and as a different means of sharing and communicating information.
Absolutely. So, I mean, obviously, I think, when I drop this, I mean, people are gonna want to hear you, and I'm so proud, as I said, and just grateful to be having worked with you over the years, and just also seeing how our musical tastes um, collide. But most importantly, I just want to give a heads up to thank you and obviously Scott McLeod for letting me drop that video on his new
Oh,
album.
Scott was happy to share it, as you know, and Scott is someone I've been working with really a lot in recent years. And my relationship with Scott McLeod has really developed in recent years, although I was a long time fan. I saw Soulside and Fugazi play together at the legendary Fort Reno in 1989. And so the the experience that I have with that guy goes back decades. But in recent years, we've become very good friends between Prague and Vienna, where he now lives. And we're both sort of ex DC guys coming out of the DC punk scene of the late 80s who ended up in Central Europe for different reasons. But I'm really happy to be working with Scots very deeply and all the guys from Soulside and Girls Against Boys on this current project, which is still ongoing, but it's going very well. And so I'll be happy to share with you and your viewers more videos of Scott McLeod and Paramount Styles in the near future. That's stuff that I'm editing with, not as we speak, but last week and this week and next week. So
Yeah,
it's what.
and the one thing I just got to put it out there. There's a kind of a bit of a rift within the so-called vinyl community right now. So it's not just our viewers. I mean, we may jump on other channels. There's some good people out there. I'm not wanting to own any channel. I'm wanting to share music. And like I'm saying, we just did a little test tonight. We're dropping some stuff. You've just been a stalwart. And I said to you earlier before we kind of, lighting is not perfect, sounds not perfect, and we both filmmakers. Whatever, there are people that don't want to perfect things. But I mean, I said to you earlier, maybe just put out 5 records, that you can share, and then we can talk about some other stuff. So, you had an idea, so maybe, let's do
Happy
that
to
right
talk
now.
about whatever, but basically, what I essentially did when you asked me that, I put out the 3 records I listened to today. I only listened to 3 records today before I went out and did some errands. And the records that I listen to on any given day might seem sort of random, but they're part of my working and thought process through the day. So I put aside 3 records that I listened to most recently today in the afternoon, and also 3 records that are deeply connected with my films and the things I'm working on. Because a lot of the work that I do with films also leads to reissues or new projects that come out on vinyl. And I see that as an integral part of the process. I see the filmmaking process and the vinyl reissue or new issue process as being directly connected to that. I think music and film are very closely related. For me, they've always been similar art forms. They have a similar sensibility. And I think music is something for all of us, especially of our generation, that opens the window or the door to explore other art forms, not just cinema, but visual arts and literature and everything connected with that, and also social issues and politics. I think vinyl and music is a very uh, it's a very advantageous way to start exploring those things.
Absolutely. And, that's some of us, that's why we grew up, we talk about the OG, become the thing, but, some of us just grew up with records and we never ever sold our records or sold a record here or there, but we just carry. It took me until about 1993, 94 to get into CD. I was just married to this medium of all this stuff that's behind me, and it's quite amazing because you and I met, connected over sort of South Africa, uh, the Flame Project, etc. And then suddenly we started discussing classical, and then Pittsburgh, and then hip hop, and then you know, uh, whatever, and it's just a medium that, and obviously film, because that's where
Sure,
we're at. I think we're both very, very blessed to be working with somebody like Gary, who's, yeah,
absolutely. Gary,
he's a monster of a cinematographer.
you referenced Gary Griffin, who is the cinematographer that we both work with on the Flames film. But I've been working with Gary for more than 20 years. I know him even longer than that because even when I met him in Washington, D.C. in the early 90s, he was already a legend. But he's a cinematographer on Academy Award winning and Emmy winning music documentaries going back decades. Has done
Sundance.
yeah, he's also won the Best Cinematographer award at Sundance, but has in recent years he's been the director of photography on most of Barbara Koppel's music documentaries and also Hugo Perez. And just now, the Omara Portuondo documentary is coming out to streaming platforms. That's a big deal. But Gary also shot the Sharon Jones documentary and the Dixie Chicks documentary for Barbara and many other films for her. And I'm blessed that he did all of my films as well, mostly. And
Do
with
you, do you remember that moment? I think it was that Sharon passed when Gary was here when we were in Cape Town together.
absolutely. No, I remember that because we were just looking at the beautiful shot that Gary and Barbara put together backstage, where Sharon Jones is waiting to go on stage uh, in New York. She's waiting in the wings of the theater. Thousands of people waiting to see her for her big comeback from her then recovery from cancer. And that's that scene was something that Gary was showing at AFTA in a class where we were both present and admiring the mastery and the craft and putting this together and how ingenious it was that Gary knew let's use the flashlight from the iPhones to get the shot because the shot has to be there. And the shot is magic and it ties the whole thing together. It's beautiful and it reveals so much also about Sharon as a person and her frailties and her own stage fright, even at that stage in her career. It's amazing. So yes, I remember it very well. We had just watched that scene, and then we got the news of her passing in Cape Town while we were
No, I
filming.
remember. Yeah, so I've not announced the live stream, but we've got a fantastic human being in the gallery. He's a person for 40 man, a rare academic genius, good person who's kind of followed me around some of the troubles of the so-called vinyl community. Um, like for somebody to just jump in here, we've got like a person. I'm going to go back to a record there. 40's there. Maybe we'll get him up someday. But I'm going to use a cliche to describe 40, and it's from that band Heart. Dreamboat Annie. He's a magic man
Yeah,
because
sure.
he just jumped in here. And we didn't announce this to anybody. We were just going to roll something tonight, a little bit of a test. So 40, meet Mr. Jones. And Keith, yeah, just let's roll through those 5 records, because that's what
Okay.
interests me tonight.
Yeah, all right. So I'll just show you the first. I'll show you these 3 records I listened to today. Like this, I should probably show them in some kind of order. Actually, I have 4 records that I listened to today. So I'll start with this. If I can you see that? Carter Family.
That is what?
That's the Carter Family.
Yeah, that's the Carters. I mean, of course.
That's the Carter Family. And
June Carter.
the reason I dug this out is that I have been looking at the Martin Scorsese film Killers of the Flower Moon recently. Obviously, it's a great film. I love the film. I'm so happy that Lily Gladstone was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Actress, the first Native American Indigenous person from the country that I come from, to get that honorific. And I'm a massive Scorsese fan for decades, also especially and particularly in terms of the use of music in those films. And I was looking at Killers of the Flower Moon recently, also with Gary, our cameraman that we were just speaking about, in terms of the different use of aspect ratios, how the aspect ratio in that film shifts from the widescreen to the 4:3, which is something that I have to deal with in my editing on the DC film now, on my DC Punk film, because I have so much archive footage shot on video formats and in 4:3 and just different aspect ratios. And finding ways to work with that, which also suits the music, suits the story, helps progress things forward. And I thought it was done masterfully in Killers of the Flower Moon because in that film, Scorsese, every time he changes between the aspect ratio, and he uses a lot of still photographs and sort of fake newsreel footage and sort of obviously staged documentary footage from the Osage Nation and their situation in the 1920s, used as if it were archive footage in that film. But I thought it's a good way to study this, look at this in terms of how the movement between the aspect ratio is used in relation to the music. And the music in that film mostly is recorded from 78 RPM records, as far as I can tell, because the surface noise is left on the soundtrack. That soundtrack was put together by Robbie Robertson, also an indigenous person from the United States, who probably had an enormous influence on the development of the whole.
I think Robbie was from Canada, right?
Originally,
Canadian.
he was a First Nations person and an indigenous background, so I think he had a special sensitivity to this project. And obviously, Scorsese has worked with him for decades. But I really liked the way that the old blues and old country and old bluegrass records were used as sort of a Greek chorus to also influence how the story was told in that film. And they were used in conjunction with also mixing between the color and black and white formats and the aspect ratio of the film. So watching Killers of the Flower Moon with all of these things in mind, obviously I was struck by the use of the Carter Family on the soundtrack, So I got out my own Carter family record. It's the only original Carter family record that I have. Obviously, I have several records with Johnny Cash and June Carter, which is stuff I also grew up with. But that old Carter family record on Columbia Records.
Is that an
That's a
American press?
yeah, it's an American press, man.
Fuck,
That's
so my Maybell's there, eh?
look at that, man.
Yeah.
Ma Carter.
All circle beyond broken, you know.
So yeah,
Um,
that's what I started out listening to today, and then I actually uh, a bit later, not directly after listening to the Carter family record, but I really wanted to hear two songs, particularly from this Kid Creole and the Coconuts record,
oh wow.
which is also an
It's been
original.
years since Kick Girl on the It's been years. I mean, I had a record. I think I sold it idiotically. Um, I kind of regret it now. Oh wow.
I've got all these original. These are Zay records. I mean,
Yeah,
check, man. It's
yeah. You could check it out.
there you go.
Love it.
Which was
Love it.
Michael Zilka and Misha Esteban's great No Wave and Mutant Disco record in New York. And
Look,
Kid Creole were sort of their flagship band for a while. I love all the stuff that came out on Zay Records. It's one of my favorite record labels since the 1980s. I've loved that stuff for 40 years since the time I probably came across this record when I was a teenager. I still have it, and uh, for whatever reason, just the mood of the day and the light outside my window. I live in Prague, Czech Republic, so I live in Prague 7, which is one of the most beautiful districts, Art Nouveau neighborhood at the top of the hill, overlooking the Vltava River. So we have beautiful light here, and sometimes just the afternoon light inspires me to go in different directions with music. So I didn't really pull this out from nostalgic reasons. I was just particularly struck by that time of the day, that mood. I wanted to hear Kid Creole and the Coconuts. This is a record I actually hadn't heard in a while either. As you were saying, you hadn't heard it in a long time. But I have all of their stuff that came out in Zay Records and many other things. That's a label that I think is a little bit underrated in terms of
sure.
nice.
I'm going to stop for a second because I'm new to this. But 40's made a comment that you might want to respond to, where he
Sure.
says, "Interesting. I always felt Bowie stole Kid Creole's dance moves and costume for Bowie Serious Moonlight tour. No one said so. Just my feeling."
I absolutely think so. The white suit, the white linen suit that Bowie's wearing on the Serious Midnight Tour is probably absolutely inspired by that. But Bowie is one of those people who was a brilliant mimic and a brilliant thief and knew how to steal from the best throughout his whole career. I mean, it's as who was it, Picasso, who said it's not where you take things from, it's where you take things to. And Bowie was
Absolutely.
brilliant. Bowie was a brilliant avatar of that, of borrowing from whatever was going on. And I think also people don't realize, or people sleep on the fact that Bowie was a New Yorker for the last 4 decades of his life. In the same way that people don't think of Woody Guthrie as being a New Yorker, but these people living in New York for decades, of course, they absorbed what was going on around them. Bowie had already moved to New York at the time that Kid Creole was taking off. Bowie was past his Berlin period, which is much more significant, maybe in terms of his artistic output. But obviously, he would have been aware of before doing the Serious Moonlight tour of everything that was going on around him. And I think that's absolutely right. I think Bowie's outfits and his moves and the whole staging of that is probably definitely influenced by Kid Creole and the Coconuts. I think Kid Creole and the Coconuts brought back this kind of old school New York staging, like the like what used to be when the Andrews Sisters would perform with the Glenn Miller Orchestra at the Paramount. That 1940 glamour which is also connected with cinema. That's actually
I
why.
know why I kept my Andrew's sister's records, but I'm just going to add to that before I forget. Where a mate of mine once said, because we were discussing Bowie Tonight album, and a lot of people didn't like it, and he did God Only Knows in that track with Tina Turner, but my mate said to me, this is a time of bands like Duran Duran, and he said at that particular time, Bowie managed. I love it. I love the way he coined it. He said Bowie managed to out Duran Duran.
Yeah,
If you know
that's
what I
for
mean.
sure. Well, Bowie came in touch with the New Romantics already in London with Steve Strange and those guys when he did the
Bizarre.
for what was it, Scary Monsters and Super Creeps, or no, that was the record, but what's the song?
Scary
Anyway,
Monster.
yeah, Scary Monsters in the early '80s. So he had already
Super creep. Yeah.
absorbed that culture at its roots at the same time that Duran Duran did. So he was actually on top of it at the same time they were. Also, I mean, both David Bowie and Duran Duran worked with Nile Rodgers as their producer.
Cool.
Another on the
And I
song.
love Chick. I love Chick. Yeah. I mean, the Freak is just like a seminal fucking dance floor fucking masterpiece.
Well, no, for sure. I mean, actually, when you were talking about the fact that I was from Pittsburgh, I grew up in Pittsburgh as in my childhood, and I later moved to Washington D.C., which was a much more formative place for me, artistically and culturally, and in terms of where I ended up. But I remember in my childhood in Pittsburgh that Chic were always played at block parties, and it was always on the radio. And that era of disco was something that, even though I wasn't even listening to music yet on my own terms, I just absorbed all of it. And so I remember The Freak, obviously, very well, and Good Times. And I sort of learned to dance to those songs when they came out. But also in 1979, the Pittsburgh Pirates baseball team were on a very hot streak, and they were a wonderful sort of black consciousness team in that moment in the 1970s. Doc Ellis
Can I,
had.
can, I- can I, can I stop you for a second?
Oh,
So I've got a mate. I visited Pittsburgh. I have been in in the baseball stadium in Pittsburgh. Where that Heinz kind of all of that over there. All right, like actually eating hot dogs, and I've also been in Pittsburgh tailgating. So we've also got to find a time one day where we hang out together in Pittsburgh. But carry on.
I mean, I'm going to go there in April again. I for several decades I didn't go there, but now I enjoy going back there and hanging out with my father and his friends and checking it out. But in 1979, when the Pittsburgh Pirates were on that big run, and that was a team that had a lot of very outspoken African American players on it. But Willie Stargell, who was the captain of the team, adopted the Sister Sledge song "We Are Family" as their theme music as they were running through the end of the season, winning their pennant, and going on to win the World Series. And that track is also produced by Nile Rodgers. I didn't know that when I was 9 years old, living through that moment, but I heard that song daily at that time. And also, God, what was the Diana Ross record at that time? Which was both "I'm Coming Out" and she had another.
I'm coming out. Yeah, I mean, also another amazing music.
I have, I have,
You
I have,
guys,
I have those 45s on Motown until today. I still have them. I'll show them to you on another broadcast. But even before the David Bowie and Duran Duran period, I had already absorbed all that Nile Rodgers stuff. So he's somebody who really, I don't know, he had a unbelievable influence on American radio friendly music through all the late '70s, first half of the '80s. Uh, Incredible figure within music, and now I recognize that. Now I hear all of that continuity, and I can hear why Bowie was drawn to it, and Duran Duran, all those guys. It's clear. But when
Yeah.
you're
Do
young,
you want to do you want to just check the comments? I just get to to 40's comments there. So
okay.
Keith was in Pittsburgh when Paul Newman was filming Slapshot there in '77.
I don't remember that. Of course, I know the film Slapshot with Paul Newman, and it was a sort of cult film in the early '80s when I was in junior high school, but I don't remember the filming of it. I do remember the filming of some film with Bruce Willis in the mid '80s. He was doing riverboat chases in the Allegheny River. That was probably one of the film shoots that I actually went and looked at. That was long before I ever conceived of being a filmmaker myself. It was just a spectacle for me. But at that time, there was a lot of stuff going on around Pittsburgh. That was right before I moved to DC, and when I moved to DC, then there were even more films being shot all the time, and I became more accustomed to that. Even today in Prague, my street downstairs from where I live is very often used as a film set. It was used as a set for all the most recent version of Inspector Maigret, some French television series of the Maigret character of Georges Simenon, and uh, what was the Reinhard Heydrich assassination film that was done recently? There were a couple of them, but one of them was also filmed partly just downstairs in
Which
my.
which assassination film?
Oh, there were two films done within the last 5 years or so about the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich, who was the Reichsprotector of Bohemia and Moravia. He was basically the Nazi commandant of the Czech lands of the former Czechoslovakia,
Ooh,
absorbed into the the Third Reich. And Heydrich was that assassination was the most prominent or the most significant act of resistance that was carried out in Nazi occupied Europe all during the Second World War. No higher ranking Nazi official was taken out by resistance figures than Heydrich. Heydrich was also the architect of the so called final solution at the Wannsee conference. He was a guy who proposed that, which was one of the reasons that the Czech Air Force paratroopers took him out. But he was also being prepared to be sent to France to basically eliminate the French resistance. That was 1942, and these two Czech paratroopers assassinated him. He was riding around in an open-top car. They managed to wound him. He then later died in hospital. But it's an incredibly dramatic story, and because it takes place in the streets of Prague, every film version, going back to Operation Daybreak in the 1970s, which was a British film. I think that was the first version. There were two versions of that recently. One was a Hollywood production. One was a European or French production. One of those was also filmed in my street downstairs. That was my point. Now I live in a place
right.
that's that. But when Slapshot was being filmed in Pittsburgh, I was not really aware of it. I was too young. I
Uh,
only saw it a couple years later.
I'm going to have to moderate a bit here because oh my God, I wish we were all eating herring together. That's what I feel like right now. But getting
Came
back
from
to that,
I just came from a Swedish-owned bar where I popped in to see some of my neighbors on my way to do this. And of course, the Swedes were eating herring at the bar that somebody had freshly made. And it was like real proper Stockholm Swedish herring. So
what is life without herring?
what's life
Um,
without herring? Of course.
Herring, beer, a little bit of whiskey, and music, and we roll. Nikita, I'm going to ask you to pull out another record, just because we just on a bit of a roll here.
Well, we're on a roll. So after the Kid Creole, I wanted to get back into my African thing. That record had enough of a reggae and African influence. So I brought out this Maslatini and the Mahotella Queens record, which is not the original Gallo versions, which all came out on singles.
But that's Earthworks. I mean, for God's sake, they're an amazing label.
This is the version that we knew in the 1980s. This is the indestructible beat of Soweto era.
Of Soweto, volumes 1 and 2. Yep.
This is some of the first South African music that I ever heard, going back to when I was a teenager in the 1980s. I still listen to it 40 years later. The first South African record I ever heard was Hugh Masekela's record Riot, which I also still have as a 7-inch and still listen to. I had the great honor to eventually meet Brahu in Johannesburg
Me
years
too.
later. And when I told him that that was the record that turned me on to him, he couldn't believe it. And he said it was a record that was basically banned from airplay in the United States. And he was a huge star at that time. He was really riding high. I mean, Grazing in the Grass was the first, and I think until now it's still the only #1 record in the United
Grab
States.
something.
An artist.
Carry on talking. I'm going to grab a photograph.
Excellent. And so I mean I knew Hugh Masekela and Miriam Makeba and stuff from finding old records in shops. But in terms of connecting to stuff that was going on in South Africa in the 1980s, these Earthworks records and Indestructible Beat of Soweto, that stuff was really a guidebook to us to get into that stuff. And of course, when I heard those records, I immediately recognized certain themes and bass lines and rhythm patterns that I knew from the Malcolm McLaren album Duck Row. But I was figuring it out. I had obviously I hadn't been to South Africa at that time.
What is that?
That's Abdullah Ibrahim and Satima Bey Benjamin, isn't it?
No, that's Abdullah and Hugh. That is when Abdullah came out of exile. Oh, you're slowing down, Keith. You might be my net. We're slowing down here. Let's see what can be done. You've gone. Let's see if I can get you back. Oh, we're there. Keith's gone. Let's try and see if I can give him another invite. I'm going to try and call him on his phone anyway. Let's just see. This has just been a bit of a test tonight. Oh, he's there.
And I'm back.
Okay, so this is amazing.
Yes, please.
Old friend, we haven't been in connection for years, but he took this place. I've got to credit him, Narshan Zolk. But that was when Abdullah came out of exile. It was at the Wits Great Hall. And that's him hugging Brahu. You know, my friend Josh managed Hugh and still manages the foundation. You know, I did some projects with Hugh. And then this is one that a lot of people haven't seen. This is Abdullah playing the flute that night. Many people don't realize that.
I actually know, I have heard some of Abdullah's flute playing on record. I've never actually seen him doing it. And I think Abdullah Ibrahim he's underrated as a multi-instrumentalist and also as a vocalist. I think he's a wonderful singer as well. Abdullah Ibrahim is someone I have a huge amount of time for. I just wanted to comment on 4D Man's comment below that all three of us have a DC overlap. DC is actually that's what I would consider my hometown in the United States because it's where I spent my really formative years. Washington, DC is a place that I took as much from culturally as New York City, as Prague, Czech Republic, or as Johannesburg, or Cape Town, or Durban. But first, it was a gateway city for me to discover the world, and it was also, as you're mentioning, you lived there 4D Man in 1985. It was right after that that I went there, and that's all the time of the so-called Revolution Summer in Washington D.C., which was a huge turn in the DC punk scene or in the DIY music scene, where concerts moved from being just in the sort of approved punk venues, which at that time was mainly the DC Space and the 930 Club and Fort Reno in the summers, which was
930 Club.
all of which I spent way too much time in. But in Revolution Summer, a colleague of ours, Amy Pickering, who was then running the office management of Discord Records, sort of came up with this idea that the scene can go out into the streets and go out into public space, and really got into this working relationship with the DC city government to have gigs which were political protests in significant public spaces. The most famous of those is obviously Fugazi playing in front of the White House in 1991 in protest against the Iraq War. But the first of those was actually outside the South African embassy, starting in the summer of 1985. And that's the stuff that I'm exploring in my film now. And that's really, those are really crucial influences for me. That Revolution Summer idea of doing gigs in public space that are also public protests, that were also about the issues of the time. And the issues of the time were South Africa, but also supporting dissidents in Czechoslovakia or in Poland. And all of the films I've done and all of my work has somehow come out from that until now. So
my year 2001, living in DC, that year that I lived there, I just remember I got invited to a Freedom Day celebration at the embassy because of my work. And that was the time, I think she was the cultural ambassador or whatever she was, but Barbara Masekela was there, Hugh's family.
Well, Barbara was the first Democratic ambassador to the United States in Mandela's government.
Yes, and that's when I went. And I celebrated. That was 2001. I celebrated a South African Freedom Day there. Before he said he drove a Pontiac. I'm going to show this. This is so cool. I drove a Pontiac Firebird past the White House in '85, but Ronald Reagan did not wave.
Well, I'm sure he didn't wave. But in those days, you could still drive a Pontiac Firebird past the White House. Now it's actually a very contested public space. It's not as open as it used to be. Although I'm proud to say that street right in front of the White House is now called Black Lives Matter Plaza, thanks to our current mayor, Muriel Bowser, who had the streets renamed and painted that way to provoke the then president, who we won't name, who won't be president again. But I appreciate the fact that the DC government has continued in this line of provocation and protest and using public space, which also dates back to Revolution Summer. Revolution Summer may have started from an impulse from Discord Records, but it really deeply influenced all of the local culture there, also the local politics until now. I'm absolutely convinced of that.
All right, I'm going to ask you for the next record.
Yeah, next. Okay, so this is maybe a weirder one coming off of Mash Latini and Kid Creole, but after that, I was listening to Sergei Prokofiev, which
that must be a Melodia, right?
That's a Melodia record, which I'll show you. This is Romeo and Juliet, the full opera, which is a 3-record set, and these are really beautifully packaged Melodia records.
Oh, that's a Pink Melodia. I know that so well. Oh,
Pink Melodia, but look at this beautiful sleeve, man, with this Art Nouveau kind of. It's an excellent packaging. So I also listen to a lot of classical music, and often my mood will just send me in those directions. I listen to a lot of jazz records also, and I have a huge amount of classical music and jazz records from all of these state-owned labels.
That's great, eh? I pulled out also some Shostakovich. I mean, everything was in Cyrillic today. just going through them, but just kind of looking what's, and everybody's, yeah, just those Russian presses, I mean, that's why you made your film, I mean, you might want to talk a little bit about Vinyl Generation and what that film's about.
Well, actually, I have that. I have that up next. This is a record by. How can I?
Go, go closer, bring it up, like your face. I told you we're all learning. Yeah, go up. We can pull back. So go back, yeah, so we can see the entire album cover. I see your
Well,
face. Um,
it's actually difficult to.
what I got you. So what is that?
Okay, and I'll show you the back of it, which is you can actually read some information. This is a record. It's not really the soundtrack to Vinyl Generation, but it's a record that came out derived from my film Vinyl Generation. When I was doing my film Vinyl Generation, which was sort of a postscript to Punk in Africa, which was a film I did uh, a little bit before. We were shooting Punk in Africa between 2009 and 2011,
How
2012.
long does it take some of us to make films, eh?
But the at the same time, every time I was bringing information and footage back from South Africa, from Zimbabwe, from Mozambique for that film, and showing it to people here, everyone in Prague was saying, "Oh man, that's exactly our story. Exactly what you're documenting is it was also literally very much the situation of the punk scene in Prague and Czechoslovakia in the late 80s at the same time." And so we decided to start experimenting and just film activities that our friends were doing. We started in 2009 during the Punk in Africa process, which was the 20th anniversary of the Velvet Revolution, the end of communism in Czechoslovakia and the Czech lands. And we decided to shoot different stuff that all our friends in Prague were doing up till 2014, which would be the 25th anniversary. In the end, we went a bit longer, and Vinyl Generation only finished in 2016. But that was the original idea. It grew directly out of Punk in Africa to explore the same set of ideas, the same role that music and DIY culture had to upset an authoritarian or dictatorial regime at exactly the same time. And I always knew when, from the very start, I knew in this film, Vinyl Generation, in the Czech film, that the song Žiletky by Philip Topol and his band Sivojaci had to be the theme music, had to be the main theme. In the same way that
Where
I knew,
where can we get that music now?
well, Sivojaci's music is actually being reissued on vinyl now. Their album Brutalny Lyrica from the mid 90s, from 1995, was just reissued as a double LP, which is also that's a really excellent. That came out on Indies Records, which is a Czech company based in Brno. But the
Goes like, which label?
Indies Records,
Okay.
like the West Indies, like the cricket team.
Yeah. Indies Records.
Indies Records, which is in it's not based in Prague, but in the Czech city of Brno. But Sivojaci, which means dog soldiers, is that was one of the first Czech punk bands, which was founded in 1979 by Philip Topol, who was the older brother. No, he was the younger brother actually of the writer Joachim Topol, who is one of the leading and best known post communist writers in Czech language, who also wrote many lyrics for Sivojaci. He was also involved with the punk scene in the 1980s, also involved with underground publishing and literary magazines at a very profound level. Really important family. But Philip
Mm-hmm.
wrote the song Žiletky, or
You cut out again. All right, let's see if you come back. We'll be improving the stream in the future. 1, 2, 3, 4. Wait for Keith to come back. So message him. Cool, calm, collected. Message Keith. Lost. Let's see. If not, we can. Back at the stage. Back. All right. Back in black.
I apologize for that. My internet always just.
No worries.
Minutes.
I've rolled it through load shed. This is how we roll. We don't have to be perfect. This is such a great conversation.
Anyway, with Sivoyatsi, I knew this particular song, Gillespie. It's so evocative of the psychological and existential mood in Czechoslovakia in the late 80s. I knew that I had to use and I wanted to use that particular song, but I wanted to use it throughout the film in different versions. And there are two very well-known versions by the punk band Suboyatsi. One is the version from the time of the Velvet Revolution, which is live because they were banned from releasing and recording music at the time under communism. So the live version, which circulated on cassette tapes, is what everyone my age of my generation in Czech culture would have known first. Then there is a studio version from 1990 or something, which came out. I wanted to use those. I also wanted to use this orchestral version that the Agon Orchestra, this very well-known contemporary music ensemble, which are heavily associated with Steve Reich and Philip Glass and New York minimalism and that style of music. But they also have done orchestrations of a lot of Czech underground and alternative music, rock music. So I wanted to use all those versions, but I also wanted a contemporary version. So I asked, and I couldn't decide if I wanted something that was more on the post-punk side or something that was related to electronic music. And I narrowed it down to one candidate from each, which was the noise band Please the Trees, which is associated with my friend. It is the band of my friend Václav Havelka. That's his main music project for many years, for the last 15 years, is Please the Trees.
Also based out of Prague, right?
Also based out of Prague, but with a big following in the United States, especially associated with Austin, Texas. And Please the Trees were one of the few. They're the only Czech band, and I think one of only two European bands who opened for Rocky Erickson in Austin. Like that's how tight it is.
Funny. I pulled out a 34 elevator records today. Sorry, 40 always confuses me. My first time I ever went on Rachel's Ghost, 40 made a comment and I got scared because and I just thought like he's just like way beyond. So he said what documentarians other than Scorsese influenced Calvin. You can read. Can you see the comments on the side there, Keith?
Some of them I see.
The first time. Okay, just go to Matt. He goes, "What documentarian?" I'll show it to you so you can see it on screen.
Oh, I'm into it.
So what documentarians are there? So I got scared of this because 40 can also just throw me left, right, and center. But Leon Gast integrating African music, US funk when we were kings, and then I went explain. That was me. Right, we got the answer, and then he speaks about the Ali Foreman documentary. I mean, so that was like the Rumble in the Jungle, correct? I mean, I think James Brown actually there was that concert, correct?
I'll return to that in a second. I'll just finish what I was saying with basically I knew I wanted to do this new version either with Please the Trees or with the rapper Bonus, who I was also very taken with, um, who isn't doing music at the moment. But when I presented this conundrum to my friend Andre Storma, who's a concert promoter, who's in the film Vinyl Generation, and head of this company Scrape Sound that I've worked with for many years, he said, "Why not both of them? Why not get both of them together?" Which hadn't even occurred to me. So I was like, "Why not? Let's do some electro clash, hip hop punk thing." And that's what this record came out of, which was the version of Gillette, that Sivoyatsi song that they did for the film. They gave me several different versions, which I used all of them in the film because they were all so great. But they enjoyed it so much that they went back and did this record, which is essentially a bunch of covers of Czech post punk and alternative songs from the late 80s, not all of which are in the film Vinyl Generation, but all songs that were part of the alternative culture of that era. And they did these new electro versions. So that is what that record was. To return to the
Can
real,
any can we buy that record now?
yeah, that record is actually it's available on a Czech label called Poli 5, Poli 5, Poli 5, which is one of these small vinyl labels that's very closely connected to that community of people. Silver Rocket is another one, which is a punk label which Scott McLeod records for, who we were talking about earlier. And Scott McLeod is actually the only non-Czech artist currently who is signed to Silver Rocket. But though that little group of records are also very much tied to the fact those labels are tied to the fact that we have the vinyl pressing plant here, which is the largest and most historically significant in the EU and still running since the 1940s, the same place. It's right outside of Prague. So, and that pressing plant sort of gives a favorable situation to all these small Czech independent labels because
We
they
know
kept
that.
going all through the 1990s and early 2000s when it wasn't so fashionable. Now everyone wants to press records in Czech Republic, but these small labels were doing it when it wasn't so cool and when it wasn't such an easy thing. So they still have a strong footprint there. This record is one of them. I'll send you the information about it later
Yep.
in a
Also,
in a
yeah, and I'll drop some links later. You can, in comments afterwards. So this is my first stream. But also, where if anybody's going to watch it later, I mean, are people able to get copies of Vinyl Generation and also Punk in Africa
or
to purchase to stream?
both Vinyl Generation and Punk in Africa are available for streaming through Amazon Prime at the moment. They Punk in Africa was formerly with Netflix, but it's aged out of its situation there, and so both of them are on Amazon Prime at the moment, and they can be found there very easily. And I think all
Great.
my I have a digital management company which is also running out of Austin, Texas, and all of my films are available there.
All right. So that's our mutual friend.
Yes, that's
Correct.
our friend Jeffrey Brown.
Yeah, amazing man in Austin, Texas. All right. So you're going to drop another record. How many have we shown so far?
I have two more. I don't know how many I've showed, probably five, but I have two more. And
Cool.
these are also connected with my
So we're
films.
we're on we're on 53 minutes now. I'm gonna stop the stream at just after an hour. I'll stop it, but you'll stay backstage. We'll talk, just so you know how
Oh,
it rolls.
perfect.
All
I'm
right,
happy with
all right. Yeah,
and I
yeah. You're an absolute gem of a guest.
thank you. I love talking about music. I love talking about films. I love talking about people like David Bowie and Nile Rodgers and Yuma Sakela. I think about this stuff all the time. This is very much what influences my work as a filmmaker is just listening to records, going out, going to bars, seeing my neighbors, hanging around my neighborhood, but talking about things which are culturally relevant that also have some social significance. all my films are born out of that confluence, out of that nexus of where alternative music, social responsibility, being kind to your neighbors, being present in your own neighborhood, walking around, just being part of the world and trying to influence everyone in a small way. I do that all the time. But that is a big part of my working process, just doing that on a daily basis, going out, engaging with my neighbors. And that all starts with listening to a few records at home. Then go out, see what's happening, greet people, come back, make some notes. So all of this stuff that we're talking about is also part of what I do every day, regardless.
Absolutely. All right, let's pull out another record there.
This is the most
Wow.
important
Hallelujah.
and most. This is the
Light
most.
in the Attic as well. Our friend Matt Sullivan.
This is the most significant thing that I've been part of in terms of the connection between my films and the vinyl connection was hooking up with Light in the Attic and being part of the reissue of this National Wake record, which I helped put together and which I wrote the liner notes for. And
Well, there's no more. How do you write liner notes? Pull out those liner notes. Just show if that record's open. Just show people what.
that's a secret. But I'll get my, if you can wait 30 seconds, I'll get my DJ copy and you can explain. You talk about the liner notes and I'll bring it back in 30 seconds.
Look, well, I'll just talk a little bit to StreamYard here, and the rest is I started working with Keith because when the Rodriguez thing was released by Light in the Attic, I knew there was a lie in that, and that's why I chased up the flames. And then there was all of the National Wake thing and Punk in Africa, and I'd been around National Wake as a kid when I was 13. Ivan Katie, I met him, LA at Amoeba Records. That was the same day that I kind of had to hook up with Blondie Chaplin. I hooked up with Matt Sullivan, who Keith that introduced me to. But I think the National Wake is a much bigger South African story for Light in the Attic. They've gone on to much bigger things. But
No,
Keith
that's why I brought this up. This is my DJ
it's
copy.
fucking seminal, dude.
What I showed you before was my. I have a couple of sealed copies which I am happy to keep sealed. This I'll show you the liner notes. This is a record. I dug this out of my DJ bag because it's a record that I always play. I'm always
My mate Nick is here. He's the gem.
hi
Nick
Nick.
Pantazi, like he's like a punk rocker of note as well.
This is one of my proudest publications, and I also managed to get an article published in Rolling Stone magazine about National Wake. National Wake is something that has been one of my proudest things to be associated with in my whole career. And I'm very happy that the surviving members of the band are my very good friends. I'm actually setting up a gig for them in Prague in my local bar in March, in 6 weeks or so. And so I remain very much in touch with them. The fact that Light in the Attic put it out really gave it a different level of momentum because it was the same label that worked with the Rodriguez material. Our film Punk in Africa basically came out at the same time as Searching for Sugar Man, the documentary about Rodriguez, which went on to win an Academy Award. Our film didn't win an Academy Award, but it probably played in more festivals worldwide than Malik Benjalal's film. And we played in a lot of those festivals together. So through all of that stuff and through all of those connections which Stefan is talking about, we were able to also connect through Ivan Katie from the band National Wake to Matt Sullivan from Light and Attic, who was very open, very keen to put it out. He was into the project from the beginning. And I ended up doing this liner notes, which I've written liner notes for bands before, but this is the one that is probably closest to my heart. I don't know what's the best way to show. That's difficult to show.
No, I mean that whole booklet, that whole the packaging,
Well,
the pressing. I mean, it's
this is a 14,000 word essay that I wrote, and praise be to Matt Sullivan that he let me do something that long. Most record companies are not going to take a 14,000 word essay, and this also another thing I was able to do, which I'm really happy about. There are these sidebars on every page. That's also difficult to show. But I did a track by track oral history with the two surviving members of the band, Ivan Cady and Steve Money, um, basically collecting their thoughts on.
actually just to make it interesting because we've got some interesting folks here, and Nick is a stalwart for me. Nick Fantazzi. He's played around punk, all of that. So just to put it in context, so let's be straight about it. I mean, so they came out of Johannesburg. I mean, as far as I know, I mean, Ivan, besides being the Shifty Records and all, and the other stuff that went, and being the architect and everything else. But I mean, so Ivan is now based in LA, correct?
Yeah, Ivan is based in Los Angeles, but he more and more spends a lot of time in Miami, Florida, because his son Sasha lives there,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
now Ivan's grandchildren. So
And
Ivan is
Steve is a mutual friend of yours and another friend of mine. He's based in Prague. Steve Money was also in the band, correct?
from Cape Town and was the founder of the first noted punk band in Cape Town, the Safari Suits. Now lives in Prague, and he's my neighbor. He actually lives just around the corner from me. It's a bizarre story.
So,
It's a bizarre story, but I looked for Steve Money. Ivan Cady. I was already in touch with Ivan Cady. I had already interviewed him in Johannesburg. We had hung out. We had been in Yeovil and Hillbrow, in Soweto, all the old haunts of National Wake. I had spent a lot of time in Joburg with Ivan, and Ivan and Nadine themselves didn't know where Steve was. Steve had, when National Wake was basically forced out of South Africa by the politics at the time, Steve had moved to Italy where he had family roots, where his mother was from, and he had been living in Rome working in the film industry. Then everyone lost touch with him sometime during the 1980s.
I'm going to
But
ask. Um, sorry, just because I'm gonna go back to your liner notes in that booklet. But there's a seminal old-fashioned telegram in that. Remember the telegram?
yeah, I'll find it
All
for
right.
you.
Yeah,
It's the
no, yeah. So
from
that was a telegram. Yeah, move it. Yeah. But just read it to the audience. About a band and mixed race and apartheid in South Africa and what went on back then.
all right. This is a telegram from sent from New York in 1981, which we reproduced in the liner notes of the National Wake reissue that came out on Light and Attic about 10 years ago. I think it was 2014. Uh, so New York, December 30th, 1981. Benji Moody, I want you to know that many of us at WIA International are very excited by National Wake. Freddie Hyen of my office has worked hard on this project, and I'm delighted to learn, as I'm sure you are, that many major territories are releasing the record. Finally, but a chance to listen to the record today, and I loved what I heard. You can be sure that we will do our utmost to break your act worldwide. Many thanks for bringing National Wake to our attention and give the members of the group my best wishes. Happy New Year, Nesoi Ertiga. With the
Yeah,
address of
and
WIA International Records, which of course never happened because the record was then withdrawn from circulation in South Africa and essentially banned from airplay and from being sold after it had sold only 700 copies in South Africa. And it just sort of, the whole project just sort of died. Although it attracted the attention of Nesoi Ertiga, which is a big deal. This is the guy that signed the Rolling Stones to Atlantic Records. That's not a joke. That's as high as you can get in the music industry at that time. National Wake was also played by John Peel on his show on the BBC. So they were recognized by real heavyweights at the time, but the rotten political pressures of them being a multiracial punk reggae band in South Africa in the early 80s just told on them. They couldn't withstand that pressure. They were kicked out of their house and the whole thing fell apart. After the record was withdrawn from circulation, everything went south for them. And they ended up, all four members of the band ended up leaving the country and moving abroad. Panka Koza, the brilliant drummer, unbelievable
Yeah.
drummer, all Blood Warriors, ended up going to Ireland and doing music there. And Gary Koza played with the Malo Poets for some time, ended up playing with Julian Bahula on the South African jazz circuit in London in the mid 80s. Also played on some really interesting post-punk records, which I'll share on a future episode of this. And Ivan went to the States, Steve went to Europe. Eventually, I tracked down Steve, who was living right around the corner from where I live here in Prague, through Warwick Sony, who encountered him in Cape Town when Steve was on a visit. I had just been filming with Warwick Sony from Kalahari Surfers the month before. And when he saw Steve at the beach somewhere at Greenpoint, he said, "Hey man, these filmmakers from Prague are looking for you." And Steve, of course, said, "Well, I live in Prague. They can come find me." Now Steve and I are
Yeah.
friends many years.
Well, and then we've got somebody like Steve Howells, who's now based in Hawaii. I mean, it's just like this expat South African, music community just goes wild. We could carry on for hours and hours, but what I'm saying is, it's been an absolute gem of a discussion. I was worried about like moderating all of that, and Keith and I have been working on and off, bits and pieces on this Flame film. And we know that was the first quadraphonic record ever. That's another story. The Stones, the Beach Boys, that story. I mean, you got backstage Brian Wilson, Blondie Chaplin, all that. David Johansen. I mean, it goes on and on and on.
We'll talk about it another time. I'll just leave you in passing because I feel like I should, and I'm still going to hang around for the chat and sign in for that. But I'll leave
Absolutely. I'm going to shut down the stream now. We're going to say adios to these wonderful people.
I'm just going to put that up, man. That's what I'm.
That's what.
That's Soulside, Discord Records.
Sweet. Okay. Keith, you stay there. I'm going to shut it down. Thank you all. We didn't announce this. Okay. I'm going to end the stream, but Keith, you stay there. Cheers, folks. And hey, rock and roll. Keith, stay there. Boom.
Thank you, man.
Well.